hopefully your morning is off to a really, really good start. I wanted to start our time together by doing a real simple math equation. If you take my chaotic calendar and you add in my diminishing bank account, and then you pile on top of that all of the family dynamics that have to get balanced over the next 3 weeks, and then the cherry on top is everywhere you go is a diet killer. What does that equal? Seasonal stress, right? You might have seasonal allergies or seasonal blues, but for me, it's seasonal stress. Christmas is a time of year where we want to be happy and we want to be excited and we want to be joyful, but that all comes at a cost, right? Trying to balance this and navigate it is complicated. It's a universal principle that Christmas is complicated, and it is way challenging. Challenging to navigate, challenging to get done. And we're oftentimes going so fast that by the end of it, we look back and go, Christmas happened? So where we've come to in life, this is a general principle, but it's especially true in the month of December for each of us, is that personal productivity is no longer just a metric, it's a mandate. Right? Like in the old days, just a couple years ago, we used to measure productivity in how much did I get done, and that was about work, or that was about chores, or that was about a project that you were working on. Anymore, it's just about your day. And it's a mandate that you get a bunch of things done. Otherwise, we question our value, we question our belonging, we question if we're actually making something of our lives. But here's what's interesting, what I've noticed for myself as I try and work on things. Our measure, even though it's a mandate, our measure of productivity is on a sliding scale. I'll give you an example. If in a given day you accomplish 5 out of your 10 tasks, most of us would go, not a very productive day. I only got 50% of what I set out to do done, and all of those 5 remaining things are going to be left over for tomorrow when I'm going to pile another 10 things on top of it, and now I'm 15 things under the pile, right? But what's amazing to me is if we were to lob off just 5 of those tasks, all of a sudden you're feeling pretty good about yourself. You got everything done on your list. It's all relative, and it all depends on the size of your to-do list. Your shopping list, your cooking list, your cleaning list, your party list, whatever list you're carrying, your measure of yourself, how you feel in how you've done, depends on how many things there are to do. And because of that principle, we are all tempted at one place or another along the journey of Christmas to just give up entirely. Let's scrap the whole plan, right? Let's just crawl into our bed, pull the blinds closed and the covers over our head, and wake me up on December 26th, right? Because I just can't do it. And we're tired, and we're fatigued, and we're frustrated. Now, here's what's interesting. I am a musician, not a very good one, but I've been around music my entire life. And so I'm fascinated by professional musicians, people who do it for a living, people who get to play an instrument and get a paycheck for it. And some of the most amazing of those amazing people to me are violinists. And I was studying their habits not long ago because I love habits and all of those kinds of things. And what they've found in looking at a professional, classically trained violinist is they don't practice any more than anybody else. You would assume they get a lot more. They somehow squeeze 26 hours of practice into a 24-hour day. But what we've learned is they actually don't. They just practice more purposefully and diligently. In fact, what they've found is that what they'll do is they'll practice about 90 minutes and then they take a break. They might even go as long as 2 hours, but then they rest because it takes that kind of pace for their brain and all of that to kind of refuel and recharge and get ready for another run. Here's the secret about productivity, and I hope this helps you for all of the month of December and on into 2020. Productivity is a disciplined rhythm of work and rest. That's the key. We often think that getting a lot done means work. It's all about the work. But I'm going to challenge us to think. And I believe that what all of the scriptures say and what God has said and modeled for us is that the most productive of humans are those that have understood there is a rhythm. We do some work and we do some rest. And then we do some more work and then we do some rest. But it is not a marathon in which you sprint non-stop. And like I said, what's amazing to me is that God modeled this for us. Jesus modeled this for us. Over and over again, if you read through the biographies that we call the Gospels, so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're the very beginning of your New Testament. You read through those, what you're going to find is Jesus over and over sneaking away. You would think he'd always want to be with a crowd, but there's a lot of times where it says he went off by himself, and they didn't know where he had gone. And he was resting. He was praying. There was the one time they're all in the boat. You've maybe heard this story. They're all in the boat, and a storm comes in, and Jesus is sleeping. And that kind of bothered the disciples. They wanted him to be productive in that minute. God even, like on a grander scale, did this for us. And you look at the account of creation. God rested. And then he turns around, and for his created ones, you and me, he says, you need to rest too. That needs to be a regular practice in your day, in your week, in your month, in your year, in your decades, in your life. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say that one of, if not the primary reason Jesus was born is to remind us to rest, to give us space, to give us promise in which we can take a deep breath. Just listen to what he says. Luke wrote this down in chapter 4. Jesus stands up in the middle of a kind of a church service like this, and he starts reading from a scroll, and this is what he reads. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news." Reminder, what we believe and what we celebrate for the next few weeks is good news, so we should maybe be a little bit more happy to share it. It's good news to the poor. He goes on to say, he has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come. So, Jesus stands up, he reads this. It bothers everybody that he would pick this passage because he's reading from the prophet Isaiah. So Isaiah had come hundreds of years before Jesus. He had written down all these things that God had given him so that people would know kind of what's coming and what God thought about everything. And this was one of the promises that Isaiah had recorded. What not everybody realizes is that what Isaiah is talking about is a reference all the way back to the very beginning of our Old Testament, which would have just been known as the Jewish scriptures back in that day, in what we call the book of, or they would have called the scroll of, Leviticus. So I bet you never thought we'd talk about Leviticus at Christmas. But we're gonna, because in Leviticus chapter 25, which Isaiah is referencing here, we learn about what they knew as the year of Jubilee. Now, if you grew up in this area, there's a town around here that has Jubilee days. I don't know if it has anything to do with the Bible, but that's why that word might be familiar to you. But the Jews would celebrate the year of Jubilee every 50 years. And here's how it worked. It was a break year. Now, you're familiar with Sabbath. That was the word for break. It means to cease or stop. And you know from the 10 Commandments, those are like the big ones, right, that everybody knows. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but one of the big 10 Commandments is remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. One of the things that God gave us from the very beginning was part of your weekly rhythm needs to be a day of rest. You need to stop everything you're doing and just breathe a minute. Just take a break. And that's not new news to us. Even if you've not been to church in a long time, or maybe even ever, you've probably heard of the Sabbath day. And most of us would say Sunday's our Sabbath, or maybe Saturday is our Sabbath. Did you know, though, that every seventh year for the Jews was also a Sabbath year? So not only was the seventh day a break, the seventh year was a break. And then when they move into the promised land, God says, you're going to take a Sabbath day, you're going to take a Sabbath year, and then every 7 years, you're going to have an extra Sabbath year, which is we're going to call the year of Jubilee. So it was the 50th year. 7 times 7 is 49. On that 50th year, they would have the year of Jubilee. And we're going to study that for the next few weeks because there are some amazing things that God says this is how we're going to do life. Debts are going to be forgiven. Slaves are going to be freed. You're going to take a break for a year. And what we're going to look at today is he says, you're not even going to work the soil for a year. It's an amazing moment where God says all of the busyness that goes into just being awake every day and every week and every month and every year is going to stop. Now, here's why that has anything to do with Christmas. Because the year of Jubilee, the way that everybody knew the year of Jubilee was starting was because the first day of the year of Jubilee was the Day of Atonement. Now, the Day of Atonement was another time where the Jews would be reconciled with God. And what would happen is they would be restored with him because all of their sin debt would be forgiven. In other words, they would look at it as, my slate has been wiped clean and I am right with God once again. There's been payment or sacrifice for what I've done to rebel against God or try to take his throne or anything like that. And you're going, well, that sounds awfully familiar. This almost sounds like an Easter message. Here's why. Because the year of Jubilee and the Day of Atonement all point forward to Jesus. And that's why it's important to understand all of this at Christmas time. So here's what's amazing. In the old days, when there was just the Jewish scriptures, all they understood it as, Day of Atonement, Year of Jubilee, as the practice of what it meant to be a Jew. But then Jesus is born, he lives his life, does his ministry, all the miracles, he dies on the cross, then he comes back to life and goes to be with his Father in heaven. And all of the early first century Christians, they go back to the Jewish scriptures and they start reading it differently. In fact, I'd go so far as to say this. Early Christians started reading Leviticus with brand new eyes. They started to wonder, does that have anything to do with this? Did then have anything to do with now? Was God trying to say something back then that we didn't know he was trying to say until just now? And what they realize and what they start to share with everyone around them, including you and I today, is that when we talk about atonement or payment for our sin or the forgiveness of debt, Jesus is our atonement. That what he did on the cross was make us right with God again. He forgave us our debts. He forgave us our transgressions. He forgave us our wrongs. He wiped our slate clean. And what Jesus did with his life was he ushered in the age of Jubilee. So when he stands up in front of all these people and he says, the day of the Lord's favor, i.e., the year of Jubilee, he's saying it starts with me. I'm the beginning of a new age. An age in which you can rest because I've taken care of you. It's an amazing moment that probably ticked a few people off, like I said. But here's what those New Testament writers did. They took and they went through meticulously all of those Jewish scriptures, and they chose Greek words. So a little fun fact about the Bible. The original language in all of the New Testament is Greek. The original language in all of the Old Testament is Hebrew. And what the New Testament writers did was they found the Greek word that translates into the same word for Hebrew as atonement. So that there would be no mistake that we understood Jesus is the one that makes us right with God so that we can enter into a year, an age, a reality, a life of Jubilee and rest. So I want to take just a few minutes and look at kind of the first chunk of the year of Jubilee to help you understand how serious and intense this idea is from God. So Leviticus chapter 25. I know you probably have not cracked your Bible or opened your phone Bible up to that book ever. We kind of skipped that in the plan. So we'll just look at it for just a few minutes. Don't worry, I got the words up here. It says, set this year apart as holy. So it's talking about the year of Jubilee, a time to proclaim freedom throughout the land for all who live there. It goes on to say, it will be a Jubilee year for you, when each of you may return to the land that belonged to your ancestors and return to your own clan. During that year, you must not plant your fields or store away any of the crops that grow on their own. And don't gather the grapes from your unpruned vines, but you may eat whatever the land produces on its own. Here's how you can remember what the year of Jubilee was about for the Jews in those days. It was a complete and total socioeconomic reset. It was a redo. So if you got land because someone owed you money and they had to give you their land, you were leasing it. You were not owning it. It was going to go back to them one day. In that day when slavery was accepted as like commerce almost, if my family fell into hard times and I gave myself to my debtor as a slave to pay for my debt, that owner would know that there was coming a day where I would be released. The year of Jubilee meant everybody's free. Every debt is forgiven. It's a total restart. And it's so intense that God says even the land will get a break. Even the soil that you work to grow crops, to harvest, to sell at market, you need to give that a break. I want everything to have a break. Everything to start over. Everything to take a deep breath. Because God knew, and He wired into us and all of creation this idea of a rhythm of rest. I know that some of us would love it if it was a life of rest. Right? Like some of us would love to believe that what God has offered us is just, we don't have to worry about anything or do anything or work or any of that kind of stuff. And that's just really not how God works. Part of what He saw as great in us when He made us was that we do work. But there is a rhythm of rest. And God wired it into the nation of Israel, and He wires it into you and I today. In that there is a time and a place for you to go hard and for you to try and check off all the boxes. But make no mistake, there is also a time where you should forget about the rest, where you should let go and take a break. And if Jesus' birth is the beginning of that age for us, then Christmas should be a time, maybe a little different than it's been for all these years. This is what it goes on to say in Leviticus. But you might ask, I'm so grateful. So Moses wrote down Leviticus. I'm so grateful that he included these words because this is what went through my head. I'm not even a farmer. But it might have gone through your head too. You might ask, what will we eat during the 7th year? This is all the type A planter people. Since we are not allowed to plant or harvest crops that year, be assured, God says. In other words, take a deep breath. I will send, the question is, what will we do? He says, I will send my blessing for you in the 6th year, so the land will produce crop large enough for 3 years. In other words, in year 9, you will still be eating off of year 6. So when I get ready to give you a break, I will take care of you. So the year of Jubilee is not only a year of deliverance. That's the easy way to see it, right? Everybody's freed, all the debts are let loose, it's deliverance. But it's also a year or a period of time of dependence. Because in order for me to take a deep breath, I need to trust that someone else is holding down the fort. And God comes along and he says, I know how you work. I know that you're going to panic. And in our context, it's not who's going to take care of the plants, who's going to take care of the harvest, it's who's going to do the wrapping, who's going to do the shopping, who's going to do the dressing, who's going to get them to the party on time, who's going to be the room mom, who's going to be the room dad, right? Like, we got to figure all of that out. And if God says, hey, I want you in this time for you to experience a little jubilee and take a break because that's what I came to give you, we go, well, what is going to happen? And maybe, just maybe, God says, trust me. Because in case you forgot, I put the whole thing together. I know how the whole thing works. And I know how it's going to work tomorrow, too. So just take a beat. I have gotten this kind of mantra in my head around Christmas. And you know this about me. I started counting down to Christmas 2019 on December 26, 2018. I love Christmas. But I, too, have to be reminded that this is supposed to be a season of ease, not extra. If we're going to celebrate the birth of Jesus, who is our atonement, who initiated the time of the Lord's favor, the year of Jubilee for us, then this should be a time of ease, where we all go, God's got this. And in case you don't believe me yet that there's a tie here, just listen to the words of Jesus himself. Matthew wrote these down. Jesus says, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Now here's what's interesting, how he says he's going to give us rest. Take my yoke upon you. Now, if you don't know what a yoke is, this is a reference to the old cattle farming days. They put the yoke over the neck of their cattle to pull a tiller or things like that. But what the smart farmers would do is they'd get 2 oxen or 2 cattle, and they would share a yoke so that they were sharing the load. So what Jesus invites you to is, take my yoke upon you. We'll do this together. And he says, let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find, everybody say it with me, rest. Jesus says, you will find rest for your soul. That is the deepest kind of rest you and I could ever hope for or experience. I think we would all agree there is a difference between rest in I get a day off and rest in the very core of who I am is at peace. And Jesus says, take my yoke upon you. I'm not promising there's not going to be some sledding to do, some road to cover, some work to get done. But what I can promise you is that in the midst of it, as we go together, I will give you rest for your soul. Because I've become the atonement for you. And I have come to give you rest. So, for you and for me, we can rest knowing God's got the rest. We can rest knowing God has the rest. I think of it like the yoke thing being, I don't have to go at 100%. Because I've got someone with me helping me. So I can rest because whatever load I'm not pulling, someone else is pulling with me. And that is the promise for you this month, this season, and all of your life. When you saddle up next to Jesus, when you begin to follow him, his promise is rest and peace and help and wholeness and an opportunity to actually celebrate good news instead of dread work news. Here's what everyone has come to understand. whether it's in Christian circles or outside the church circles, science circles or spiritual circles, they're all going to say the same thing. Productivity emerges from work we find meaningful and valuable. It's different than productivity emerges from those with the highest degree of willpower or the highest degree of talent or the most amount of time. It's not where it comes from. And so here's what I've been thinking about. If Jesus is all that we're saying he is, and Christmas is the beginning of all that we're saying it is, and this is true, then maybe the problem with Christmas is not that you're overwhelmed, but that you're underwhelmed because you don't see the meaning or the value in it anymore. Have you ever thought about that? That maybe sometimes the things that stress us out are things that underwhelm us in terms of value and meaning. Just this week, a good friend of mine who is very mature, I won't call her old because I work with her every day, but very mature, she looked at me and she said, because I said, I just don't know how you do what you do. And she said, listen, when you love what you do, it's not work. You've heard that before. When you love what you do, it's not work. It's just what you love. Which made me go, what if the reason some of us have been dreading this season, because we just see it at work and we don't love it. We don't see the meaning or value in it because we've misunderstood what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be extra, it's supposed to be ease. It's not supposed to be stress, it's supposed to be rest. And what if you and I re-engineered our celebration of Christmas to be more along the lines of, goodness sakes, Jesus has initiated the age of Jubilee for us, where we're set free, where our debts have been forgiven, where we've been made whole. All of a sudden, I start celebrating something entirely different. And I refuse to allow this to be robbed of its real weight and its real meaning. I can rest knowing he has the rest. So my encouragement to you, it is December 8th. Christmas will be here in just over 2 weeks. And 2020 will be here in just over 3. Here's my encouragement to you. Put it on your calendar as an all-day event, Sabbath, at least 3 times between now and then, where you stop. No baking, no wrapping, no shopping, no commitments, none of that, where you just rest. Watch a Christmas movie. Eat the things you've been baking. Spend some time thanking God for giving us his Son. And in his Son, giving us all that Jubilee was about. Because it was Jesus that said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. And the year of the Lord's favor, he didn't say is coming. He said it has come. This Christmas can be a year where you, as a weary soul, rejoice because you've learned the rhythm of rest. And here's what's amazing. You are going to get to remind yourself of that today. Because this Sunday, 1 year ago, we were in the middle of a very different Christmas series that we called Thanksmas. And we had challenged everybody to get a big pack of sticky notes, and every day they were going to write something they were thankful for, and you stuck them up all over your house. And then on the last day of the series, we had you bring them in, and we collected them all. And we told you we were going to give them back to you in a year. And I bet you thought we forgot. I bet you thought we threw them all away. But we didn't. We've got them waiting for you right out there. So as you leave today, out in the lobby is a table, and they're kind of sorted in alphabetical stacks. You're going to need to look and dig a little bit. But you're going to find your envelope if you turned one in. And inside of it, you are going to find a month's worth of things that you are thankful for. And here's why that's so important. You're going to be able to see God had me. God was caring for me. So maybe this year, I can rest because I've already experienced that He takes care of me even when I take a break. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much. It's moments like this maybe where we're reminded that Christmas is even bigger as a Christ follower than we ever give it credit for. That it's more than just a cute little baby and a silent night. It's more than jingle bells and all of those things. That it's the delivery of a promise, of a reality that we are so in desperate need of. We feel it in our souls because we are weary. But today you've reminded us that in that baby, in your Son Jesus, we have been given a thrill of hope. And help us, will you please, Father, to rest in that this year. In Jesus' name, amen.